Welcome to Founding Chronicles, where we bring forgotten stories of American history back to life. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss a story. Now let us step back to the year 1871, to a small New England town where a strange and haunting tale began the story of Catherine Doyle, the child who revealed the unknowable. The year was 1871, a time when America was still finding its footing after the Civil War. The nation was wounded, yet restless. The railroads stretched further each year, stitching together towns that only a generation before had been wild land. Small communities tried to rebuild their lives on the ashes of war, with church bells ringing on Sundays and dusty main streets filled with the chatter of gossip and trade. It was in one such place, a quiet farming town tucked between rolling hills of New England, that the strange story of Catherine Doyle began. Catherine was only 8 years old when the whispers about her started. She was a thin, pale child with wide eyes that seemed far too knowing for her years. Her father, Patrick Doyle, was a stonemason who had come from Ireland with nothing but his hands and his faith. Her mother, Margaret, was a quiet woman, known for her soft singing voice that carried over the fields when she worked the clothesline. They were not rich, but they were steady, the kind of family neighbors could count on when help was needed. Nothing about them seemed unusual until Catherine began to speak of things no child should have known. It started small, almost harmless. She would tell her mother when the post-rider was going to arrive, even when he was days ahead of schedule. She could predict storms with eerie accuracy long before the dark clouds appeared on the horizon. Some said she simply paid attention more than others. Children often notice the small details grown-ups ignore. But then her words took a darker turn. Catherine began to speak of things that had not yet happened, and when they came true, people grew uneasy. One autumn afternoon, she told a neighbor that his cow would be found dead by the creek the next morning. The man laughed it off, but when he walked down to water his herd at dawn, he found the poor beast lying stiff in the grass, just as Catherine had said. Another time, she told her father to be careful while working with the quarry stone, warning him that the scaffolding was weak. He brushed her off, but later that same week, the scaffolding splintered under the weight of a block, nearly killing a worker. Only chance or something more's laved the man's life. Whispers spread through the town. Some believed Catherine was blessed, a child touched by God. Others muttered that she was cursed, that no good could come from a little girl who saw what others could not. In those days, when the wounds of war still ran deep in superstition, mingled freely with faith, the idea of a child with such knowledge unsettled everyone. The church elders grew uneasy. Reverend Samuel Blackwood, a stern man with eyes as sharp as flint, began to preach about false prophets and the dangers of listening to voices not born of the Holy Word. He never spoke Catherine's name aloud, but everyone knew who his sermons were meant for. Her mother wept in silence after Sunday service, while her father clenched his fists and stared at the floor, unwilling to raise his voice against the reverend, but unwilling to deny what his daughter could do. The truth was, Catherine herself did not understand her gift, if gift it was. She often woke in the night trembling, her small body soaked in sweat, her voice whispering names and places as if she had been somewhere else in her dreams. When asked how she knew these things, she simply said, "I just hear them, like someone telling me secrets in the dark." The townsfolk tried to keep their distance, yet they could not stop themselves from listening. Some came quietly to the Doyle home, asking Catherine questions they would never admit aloud to others. Would their sick child recover? Would the harvest be good? Would a missing husband return from the logging camps in Maine? Sometimes Catherine's answers brought comfort, but other times they brought only sorrow. And as more of her words came true, the fear around her grew. One cold November evening, Catherine whispered something that would change everything. She told her mother that there would be a fire in the town before the year's end. She said she had seen the flames eating through wood and smoke blotting out the sky. Margaret shushed her, not wanting her husband to hear, not wanting such dark words to be spoken aloud. But Catherine's eyes, large and unblinking, never left her mother's face. "It will be the church," she said softly. "The church will burn." When Margaret told Patrick later, he swore her to silence. "The Reverend would hang us with words like that," he warned. "Better she keep her mouth shut than bring the town down on us." But children rarely know the weight of silence. Catherine spoke again of the fire a few days later, this time to a neighbor boy. By the week's end, the whole town knew what she had said. At first, there was nervous laughter. Children make up all sorts of nonsense, some said. But as December drew on, unease began to creep in. People checked their chimneys twice, doused their lamps more carefully, and whispered prayers before bed. The Reverend, furious that the girl's words carried so much weight, thundered from the pulpit that there was no truth in the ramblings of a child. God alone decides such matters, he roared, his voice shaking the rafters. Yet even he, when the night grew long and the winds howled across the hills, could not quite drive the fear from his own heart. Then, on a bitter night just after Christmas, when the air was sharp with frost and the stars glittered like ice, the church bell clanged a terrible alarm. Flames rose high from the roof of the meeting house. By the time men arrived with buckets, it was too late. The fire tore through the wooden beams as if the place had been waiting to burn. Sparks leaped into the sky, smoke rolled down the street, and the people of the town stood helpless as their sanctuary was devoured by fire. In the glow of that dreadful blaze, all eyes turned to the Doyle family. And in that moment, what had once been uneasy whispers turned into open fear. The morning after the fire, the town looked like it had lost its soul. The church, once the tallest and proudest building in the valley, was nothing but a blackened skeleton of beams. Ash drifted across the snow like gray feathers. The air still smelled of smoke and wet char. Men poked at the ruins with long sticks, searching for anything that could be salvaged. But there was little left beyond warped iron nails and heaps of scorched wood. The people stood in clusters, whispering. Some cried openly, for the church had been the place of their weddings, their baptisms, their last farewells to the dead. It was more than a building. It was the heart of the town. And now, with its ashes still warm, all anyone could think of was the child who had said this would come to pass. Catherine was not brought into the square that morning. Her father kept her at home, insisting she stay inside, though she begged to see the ruins herself. Patrick feared what the townsfolk might do if her pale little face appeared among them. He knew what people were like when fear had taken root in their hearts. He had seen mobs before, in Ireland and again in America. A frightened man could be more dangerous than a starving wolf. By afternoon, the whispers turned into accusations. The girl cursed it. She called it down. No child should know such things unless the devil told her. Men gathered near the blackened church foundation, their voices rising with every retelling. Some swore they had heard Catherine speak of the fire days in advance. Others claimed she had laughed when she told it, though none could quite say who had heard her laugh. Fear twisted memory until rumor became fact, and fact became judgment. That evening, the Reverend called a meeting in the town hall. The people crowded in, their faces lit by lantern light, shadows swaying across the rough wooden walls. The Reverend stood at the front, his black coat buttoned tight, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of authority. "We are a people of God," he said. "We believe in His will, His plan, and His justice. But what has happened here cannot be ignored. A child spoke blasphemy against this house of the Lord, and now it lies in ruins. Are we to believe this is mere chance? Or are we to face the truth that evil walks among us, hidden in the form of innocence? A murmur swept through the crowd, some nodding, some looking down at their hands. The Reverend's eyes narrowed, glinting in the lamplight. I do not say the child herself is wicked, but I say she may be a vessel for something darker. And it is our duty, our Christian duty, to protect this town from the snares of the devil. Margaret Doyle sat in the back corner, clutching Catherine's shawl in her lap, though Catherine herself was not there. She felt the eyes of her neighbors on her, felt their doubt and suspicion. She wanted to rise and shout that her daughter was no vessel, no wicked thing, but only a frightened child who spoke what she could not understand. Yet her tongue felt heavy, and her heart beat so hard she could not find the words. When the meeting broke, men spilled out into the frozen street, their breath steaming in the night air. Some argued that it was foolishness, that blaming a little girl would not rebuild the church. Others, louder and angrier, muttered that something had to be done before worse misfortune came down at home. Catherine sat cross-legged on the floor by the fire, her small hands wrapped around a mug of milk. She looked up when her mother entered, her voice calm, almost too calm for a child. "They think I made the fire," she said, as if she had overheard every word from the meeting, though she had not been there. Margaret dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms. "Don't you listen to them," she whispered fiercely. "You didn't cause it. You didn't." But Catherine only tilted her head, her dark eyes unblinking. "It wasn't me, Mama. I just saw it. Like someone showed me. I can't stop what I see." Patrick sat in his chair, staring into the flames, his jaw set tight. He was a man who believed in hard work and faith, not omens or curses, but even he could not deny what his daughter had said before the church burned. The weight of it pressed on him until he finally spoke, his voice low. "From now on, no more words like that, Catherine. Do you hear me? If you dream, keep it to yourself. If you see, keep it to yourself. Not a word outside this house." Catherine nodded, though her mother saw the confusion in her eyes. To ask a child to lock away her voice was like asking her not to breathe. For a while, it seemed as though silence might save them. Catherine stopped speaking of her visions. She played with her rag doll, helped her mother with chores, and walked beside her father to the fields. But the quiet only lasted a season. The spring of 1872 was late and cruel. Rains turned the roads to mud, and sickness spread through the valley. A fever struck the children first. One by one, families kept their little ones home, praying it would pass quickly. Some recovered, some did not. One night, Catherine woke screaming, clutching her chest. When her mother rushed to her side, she whispered the name of a neighbor's child. "He won't wake up tomorrow." Margaret tried to hush her, but the words were spoken, and by morning they proved true. The boy was gone. The family tried to keep it secret, but such things cannot be hidden in a small town. Before long, everyone knew that Catherine had named the child before death carried him away. Grief turned to fear, fear to anger, and soon the Doyles found themselves at the center of a storm. They could not escape. Mothers pulled their children away when Catherine walked down the lane. Men crossed themselves when she passed. Some called her a witch outright, though others muttered only behind closed doors. Still, Catherine did not seem afraid. If anything, she grew quieter, more solemn, as though the weight of what she carried was pressing down harder with each passing day. At times, her eyes seemed far older than 8 years. She would sit by the window for hours, watching the hills, her lips moving soundlessly, as if in conversation with someone no one else could see. Her mother wept often, though she tried to hide it. Her father grew more bitter, his temper sharp, his hands rougher than they had once been. The family, once respected, now lived under a cloud of suspicion that seemed it would never lift then. One evening, Catherine spoke words that chilled even her father to the bone. She came to him as he sharpened his tools by lamplight, her face pale, her voice steady. "Papa," she said softly, "you won't live to see another winter." Patrick froze, the wet stones slipping from his grasp. His first instinct was to scold her, to forbid her, to tell her never to say such a thing again. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw no malice there, no childish mischief. He saw only the solemn certainty that had haunted him since the night. The church burned. The words lingered in the air like smoke, and though he tried to dismiss them, deep inside, he wondered if his daughter's vision was not a curse after all, but a truth that no man could outrun. The weeks after Catherine spoke, her father's fate passed in a slow, heavy silence. Patrick Doyle worked harder than ever, as though sweat and stone could silence the echo of his daughter's words. Each morning he rose before dawn, swinging his hammer at the quarry until his arms trembled, driving wedges into granite until his palms bled. He was determined to outlast her prophecy, to prove that no child's whisper could bend the will of a man. But at night, when the house was still, and the lamp burned low, his eyes betrayed him. He would watch Catherine from across the table, his jaw tight, fear flickering in his gaze. Margaret tried to hold the family together, but even she felt the shadow of her daughter's words pressing down. When Catherine spoke, things happened. That was the simple truth. Margaret prayed every night for God to take the burden from the child, for the voices that came to her to be silenced. Yet Catherine remained as she had always been, quiet, solemn, and strangely watchful, as if she lived with one foot in this world and another in some unseen place. By late summer, Patrick began to tire in ways he never had before. His shoulders ached, his breath came short, and there were nights when he could not finish his supper. He waved off Margaret's worry, saying only that age was creeping on him faster than he liked. But Margaret saw the change, and Catherine, with her unblinking eyes, saw more than anyone. She would sit by her father's chair, her small hands folded in her lap, and watch him as if memorizing his every movement. The townsfolk noticed too. Patrick's once steady stride grew slower. He no longer joked with the other men in the tavern, no longer sang old Irish songs as he walked home from work. He seemed hollowed out, like a tree that still stood but had begun to rot from within. And though no one dared say it aloud, many remembered the child's words. "You won't live to see another winter." As autumn crept in, the Doyle family grew more isolated. Neighbors no longer came by to share bread or borrow tools. Children no longer played near their yard. When Margaret went to market, the women behind the stalls greeted her with strained politeness, their smiles thin, their eyes wary. Some even crossed themselves after she passed. It was as if the whole town had decided that the Doyles carried some dark sickness, and to draw near them was to risk catching it. Then one gray October morning, the prophecy came to pass. Patrick was working alone at the quarry, levering a block of stone into place. His fellow workers later said they heard a cry, sharp and sudden, and when they ran to him, they found him beneath a shattered beam. His chest was crushed, his breath shallow, his face already pale. He lingered only a few minutes before he slipped away, the life leaving him as quietly as a candle guttering in the wind. The men carried his body home on a cart. Margaret's wails echoed through the valley, carrying farther than the tolling of any bell. Catherine did not cry. She sat on the porch steps, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the stillness of her father's face. When one of the neighbors tried to lead her inside, she pulled away and said in a flat, steady voice, I told him he would not see the winter." Those words, overheard by more than one witness, sealed her fate in the eyes of the town. Whatever pity some had once held for the Doyles was gone. To them, the child had spoken death into being, and then sat waiting for it to come. They whispered that she was a witch, that her soul was touched by something unholy. Some even muttered that Patrick's death was a punishment for harboring such a child. The Reverend, who had once warned against her visions, now spoke more fiercely than ever. Standing in the rebuilt church half-finished, still smelling of raw timber, he declared that the devil prowled in many forms. Even the smallest lamb, he thundered, may carry the wolf in its heart. And though he never named Catherine, the meaning was clear. Margaret tried to shield her daughter, but the walls of their little home seemed thinner each day. Rocks appeared on their doorstep. A dead crow was left hanging from their fence. Neighbors who had once shared bread and laughter now turned their backs. When Margaret walked with Catherine, she felt eyes boring into them from every window. Through it all, Catherine remained strangely calm. She did not flinch when others whispered, nor did she cry when cruel words were spoken within earshot. Instead, she grew quieter, more withdrawn, her gaze fixed on things unseen. Sometimes she would sit for hours, staring into the distance as though listening to voices carried on the wind. One night, as Margaret sat by the fire with her sewing, Catherine came to her side and placed a hand on her arm. "Mama," she whispered, "don't be afraid when they come. I'll already know." Margaret dropped her needle, her breath catching. "When who comes?" she asked, clutching her daughter's hand. But Catherine only shook her head, her dark eyes unreadable. "I'll already know," she repeated, and then slipped away to her small bed, leaving her mother trembling in the firelight. The winter of 1872 fell heavy over the town. Snow piling against doors and windows, the river freezing solid. The Doyles kept to themselves, their home a small island of silence amid the storm. Yet even in that silence, fear festered. The townsfolk could not forget the fire, the fever, the death of Patrick Doyle. They could not forget the words spoken by a child who should not have known such things. And as the nights grew longer, their unease hardened into something darker, something that would not stay hidden forever. For in small towns, suspicion is a seed that never dies. It waits, it spreads, and when the time is right, it bears bitter fruit, and Catherine Doyle, with her solemn eyes and her terrible knowing, was at the heart of it. The winter deepened, and with it, the silence around the Doyle home grew heavier. Catherine rarely left the house. She would sit by the frosted window, watching the white hills stretch out under the pale sky, her face calm, her small hands folded. In her lap, Margaret did everything she could to keep her daughter safe, but she felt the air shifting in town, felt the weight of eyes on her back each time she ventured out for flour or firewood. It was not just fear anymore. It was anger, brewing and restless, waiting for a spark. Whispers turned to mutterings, mutterings to talk around the tavern fire. Men who had lost children to fever, wives who had buried husbands too soon, families who mourned the church that had burned all found their grief sharpening into blame. They could not strike at the unseen hand of fate, but they could strike at the pale, silent girl who seemed to speak with fate's voice. The Reverend fanned the flames without ever saying her name. His sermons grew harsher, warning of wolves in lamb's clothing, of false prophets, of God's testing of the faithful. And each time his words rang out, the people's eyes turned inward, toward the little house at the edge of town where the widow Doyle lived with her strange, knowing child. It happened on a night of bitter cold, when the wind cut like knives and the moon hung low and sharp over the snow. Margaret had just banked the fire and was preparing to lead Catherine to bed when a noise rose outside, boots crunching hard on the frozen ground. Voices carried sharp in the still air. She froze, her heart lurching. Catherine, sitting in her small chair by the fire, lifted her head. "They've come," she said softly. "I told you, Mama. Don't be afraid." Before Margaret could speak, a fist struck the door. The wood rattled under the blow. Another strike followed, then another. She clutched Catherine's hand and whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't move." But Catherine slipped her hand free, her small face oddly serene. The door burst open. Cold air swept in, along with half a dozen men, their lanterns casting wild shadows across the room. Their faces were hard, red from wind and drink, their eyes sharp with the resolve of men who believed themselves righteous. Behind them, more figures stood in the snow, their shapes shifting in the flickering light. "Where is she?" one of the men demanded, his voice rough. "Where's the witch child?" Margaret sprang to her feet, her body a shield between them and her daughter. "She's no witch," she cried. "She's a child. My child, you'll not touch her." But Catherine stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, met the men's with a calm that unsettled them, more than tears or screams ever could. "I knew you would come," she said, her small voice steady. "I saw it." The men shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Some faltered, as though they had expected fear, not certainty, but anger. "Is a river that once loosed will not easily dam. You've cursed this town," the leader growled. "You spoke the church's burning, and it burned. You named the dead before the fever took them. You foretold your own father's end. Enough. We'll not have the devil's work here." Margaret threw herself in front of her daughter, sobbing. "She's no devil's child. She sees things, yes, but she doesn't cause them. God help me. She's just a little girl." For a moment, the men hesitated. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the shutters, filling the silence with a voice not their own. Catherine looked at her mother, then placed a small hand on her arm. "It's all right, Mama," she whispered. "This is how it must be." Margaret's cry tore from her throat, raw and desperate. But before she could gather her daughter into her arms, rough hands pulled her aside. Catherine did not fight. She did not struggle. She let them lift her, her thin frame light as a bird in their grasp. She looked at the men, her expression calm, almost pitying. "You can do what you will," she said quietly, "but I will still be heard." They dragged her out into the night. The snow crunched under boots, the lanterns cast long shadows, and the people of the town stood gathered in a circle, their faces pale in the cold light. Women clutched shawls to their throats, men's hands tightened on tools and ropes. Margaret stumbled after them, screaming, pleading. Falling to her knees in the snow, what happened next was never written down in the records of the town. Some said they only meant to scare her, to drive her and her mother out. Others claimed the men's. Anger burned hotter than their reason. But when morning came, Catherine Doyle was gone, and the only trace of her was a small hollow in the snow at the edge of the woods. As if something light had been set down and carried away. Margaret never recovered. She searched the woods for days, her voice hoarse from calling her daughter's name, her fingers numb from the cold. Some said she went mad, that she spoke to shadows, that she listened for footsteps that never came. Within a year, she, too, was gone, her body found one morning by the riverbank. Her face peaceful, as though she had at last followed her daughter into the silence. The town moved on, as towns always do. The church was rebuilt, the fields planted. The seasons turned, but the story of Catherine Doyle lingered, whispered in low voices, told in warnings to children who spoke out of turn. Some swore that on winter nights, when the wind swept down the valley, you could still hear her voice in the trees, calm and steady, speaking of things yet to come, and whether they believed she was cursed or blessed, touched by God or claimed by the devil, none could deny this. Catherine Doyle, the child who revealed the unknowable, left her mark on that valley in 1871, a mark that no fire, no death, no silence could ever erase, For the truth is, this people fear what they cannot understand, and they will destroy what they fear. Yet in their destruction, they cannot escape. The one thing Catherine knew better than any of them, that fate will always speak, whether or not anyone dares to listen.